All right, happy Wednesday, everyone. Looks like we've got a few folks here, so we can get started. I don't see Sarah, so we could just jump ahead to Jake's demo to start, and then circle back there when she gets here. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into this. Today is August 5th. This is the August CI/CD demos, and we've got a bunch of things on the agenda today. So we'll try to keep an eye on time. But Jake, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Awesome, thank you, Darby. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share this one. So what I'm going to be sharing here is, by the way, it's the right screen sharing. It should be like the CI/CD settings. I get like a thumbs up from someone. Let me know if you can see that. Cool, thank you. So I'm going to be sharing a new feature in CI/CD settings called deploy freezes. This lets you set a freeze period on deployments via the UI. So this can prevent like unintentional deployments during a time in which you don't want to be deploying anything. So I'm going to just collapse this for a second. So you're in CI/CD settings of your project. You scroll down, there's a new section called deploy freezes down here. Expand that section and you'll get an empty table if you don't have any freeze periods currently existing. I'm going to open up my console just to show what happens in the network tab. Just going to move there. And so to create a deploy freeze, it's pretty simple. Just click on the add deploy freeze button. And then you can use cron syntax to say like when you want your freeze to start. And we have a handy link here to look at what cron syntax looks like. So I'll open that in a new tab, and I'll just I'll copy this. And so we have a deploy freeze here that starts at the 5th minute of the 4th hour of any day of the week. So not a really useful deploy freeze syntax here, but just for demonstration. And then I'll have it start at the 5th minute and at the 6th minute. So it's a 1 minute long deploy freeze period. We can select, I think the debugger here is pushing down this drop down. There we go. Okay. So now we can select where, what time zone we want this deploy freeze to be set in. So we have the cron syntax dictating the time and the date, but we need to set a time zone. So I'm on the East Coast. So I'm going to hit, I'm going to type in East to get the Eastern time zone. And then I'm going to add the deploy freeze. So the deploy freeze shows up here. And in the network tab, we can see a post request gets sent to the freeze periods API. And we just get back our deploy freeze in JSON here. And then a subsequent get request comes back that fetches all the deploy freezes. So if I set another deploy freeze, just for the sake of demo, I'm going to move this down so that the drop down appears correctly. I'm going to just put in an example cron syntax and put in Hawaii. We'll get that subsequent deploy freeze time zone and freeze period. And we get our second post request and that get request that contains both freeze periods. So that's all that there was here to demonstrate. And this is just a way to add freeze periods via the UI. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
That was great. Thanks, Jake. Peyton, do you want to verbalize your question?
Yeah, sure. That was awesome, Jake. Cool to see that. I was wondering if this was just like an MVC, or there are any plans to like make a deploy freeze editable, deletable through the modal, or is that not currently possible with the backend endpoint?
That is currently possible. This was the MVC from 13.2. So yeah, editing and deleting deploy freezes is possible. It just isn't in the UI as of yet, but I imagine that it will be in the future at some point.
Cool. Nice job.
Do you mind if I add something to that, Jake?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in there is a longer term view that the deploy freeze will become a part of an environments dashboard, and eventually the long term view is there'll be some type of calendar where you'll be able to see my deployments, my freeze periods, and any other important events for the environments. That's big picture for. It's not defined which release we'll do that in, but that's been talked about in some of the release meetings.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. Do you know if that means that setting freeze periods is going to move out of this settings page then and into that dashboard, or?
Yeah, that level of detail hasn't been discussed, but I imagine it would be probably best to have it at one location on the dashboard. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Great.
Cool. I had the next question. Just curious what happens with the deploy job when the deploys are frozen. Does it get skipped? Does it show in the UI? Is it just not there? How does the user see that?
I think it just gets skipped. So when to enable deploy freezes, you actually have to go into GitLab CI and into your YAML file and declare that when a deploy freeze is currently active, that deployment is set to null, or all the jobs are set to null. And so I think that just nothing happens during that freeze period. I don't think it gets like added to a queue or anything like that.
Cool, thanks. Nadia.
Hey, thanks. I'm just wondering if maybe this is a first iteration only. I see actually there is a link like that helps to generate the format, but wondering if we are looking to provide some more guidance about like reading and understanding the Cron Syntax format for people who are maybe not too much familiar with that or not familiar at all. I see Jackie, you're replying. Want to vocalize?
I just like watching my team speak, so I didn't want to answer this verbally, but that's okay. Jake is actually working on documentation right now about Cron Syntax, I believe, in this milestone. So that's something that we have thought about, and Jake actually suggested as a part of instrumenting this feature last milestone.
Yep.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I seen a really nice error messages in the issue for the designs, and there is a place like that asks, hey, give me some description about that. But good to hear that you thought about that I didn't have a doubt. Thanks a lot.
Yep, that actually came up in the code review process. I think that was either Andrew or Nathan spotted that we were linking off to a separate source for talking about cron. And so it was suggested to build our own internal cron documentation. So yeah, that's going to be happening this milestone. And got a question from Sarah.
Oh, this is more of a comment than a question. I'm going to be that guy at the
okay.
conference. No, I just think it's a really nice way to deal with the question of translating across time zones. Like a lot of the time, you know, people are like, oh, what time zone do we put this in? How do we let people know what time zone we put it in? And I think it's like a very elegant solution to let people define it in whatever time zone they want. And then you can be like, it's just this time zone, and let people's brains solve the hard problems. So really well done.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to see your combo box next as well, because this was sort of like a combo box-ish UI to get that time zone thing to work. So I'm excited to see your combo box next.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we can just jump into that then, because I had the last one. So let's see, let me share my desktop with everybody. can see the agenda, and then not the thing I want to show you. Where are we going? Can see the fact that I have way too many tabs all the time. I opened this and was all prepared. Here we go. No, not that. All right, so a combo box. A combo box is a dropdown, and many of the dropdowns we currently have in our product have that search box inside, right? So you like hit this button and then you get that search box. And so originally for the CI/CD settings, we wanted a dropdown that just auto-completed as you typed, and we didn't need to put the search box in it. So I built this for that settings page and then backported it to GitLab UI. So as we can see here, we have a list of animals that we tolerate. And if you go ahead and click on it, one thing that's interesting to see is this is the browser's autocomplete dropdown. So if something does not show up in our autocomplete dropdown, we don't want to break the browser functionality, right? If people are, if it's a free-form text box and they always type in the same thing, we don't want to ruin that. So the browser one shows up if ours doesn't. But then let's say I want to look for something else. So I type O. These are all of the animals that we tolerate that have the letter O in them. For this example on GitLab UI, I actually made a list of animals so that any letter you type into this dropdown, you will get at least one animal auto-completing it, just so that the example always worked no matter what. So you can pick your O, and then it's an accessible little dropdown, so you can use the arrow key to go through, and it circles around, pressing down, pressing up. You can also hover over to select an item. So if dodo is selected because that's the arrow key, but we click on hippo, hippo is selected. It's pretty keyboard navigable was one of the goals of this one. So if we type in O again, but we want to write ostrich and we're worried about the dropdown, you can hit escape once and start typing into there. If you realize you didn't want ostrich and you just wanted to clear it, hitting escape twice clears it. Again, if we pick an item from this and hit tab, it moves us to the next tabbable item. And I think that is all that is super relevant about that. I just wanted to grab the code for a second. So you can see that actually, so to make an accessible combo box, there's actually a lot of ARIA properties that you want to use so that the screen reader understands that like this list of completable items is in fact controlled by this input that we have, and that like they all belong together. And so we have all of these fun ARIA attributes. So it's a fully accessible dropdown, which for forms I thought was especially super important. And that is 4 minutes on the dropdown. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Sam, read only, huge props.
I'll say it out loud since there's no questions. Just like, yeah, well done for thinking about accessibility from the start. Like we do miss that a lot in our components. And for something that's in GitLab UI, it's even more important because it'll be used all over the place. So yeah, thank you for doing that.
And something to note, you know, front end folks, share with all your friends, if you have a dropdown that you would normally put that search box in, but you're not fetching the responses for it, you just have a list of options, you can now use this dropdown, and then you don't have to have that funny little pattern with the search box inside your dropdown. Peyton, do we have this anywhere in the product yet? We do have it in the product, and that is on the CI/CD. I'm not going to pull it up right this second, actually. It's in the CI/CD variables setup.
That's what I was wondering, if you converted that. Was that with the AWS auto typing?
It is, yes. And then I backported it and I broke all the end-to-end tests, because even if you replace something with something that's wrapped in GitLab, the end-to-end test might not be able to get the input anymore. So.
Oh, I know. I super flaky, but super awesome job.
Thanks. Are we using select to anywhere, and will they be converted? Yes, there is select to being used. There's actually a push that the front-end foundations team is working on, and then I think Sam is helping with it too, and other front-end folks, to replace a bunch of different jQuery and Bootstrap based things. So the select to and old drop downs, the modals, the tooltips, there's a whole push to improve our performance that if we can move all of these to using the GitLab UI versions, we'll be loading less code on every page. So select to will be converted.
Thanks, Sarah.
And because I am so excited to see everyone else's stuff, I am going to stop talking so the Gregor can show us about cloud native build logs.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So today I wanted to tell you a little bit more about cloud native build logs. First of all, what cloud native build logs are. So let me share my screen and show you a few things. So first of all, whenever you go to GitLab pipelines, you can click on a build. For example, let's open a danger review job, and build log is obviously everything that's here. And we refer to this thing as a build log, as a job log. Sometimes we also refer to this thing as a build trace. And there's this feature called cloud native build log, job logs. We used to call this feature live traces. And why it's important? It's important because we are working on this to address Helm chart limitations. One of the most important limitations is that there are some blockers that prevent us from moving gitlab.com to Kubernetes. And a legacy architecture of build logs is one of them. Long story short, before working on building live traces feature, we used to append a build trace to a file on a shared local storage in NFS. So, and this is kind of problematic because it does not really fit nicely into cloud native application story. It's very difficult to operate shared storage on shared block storage on Kubernetes, and we want to move away from it. So we are working on the feature called cloud native build logs, and this is going to actually help us to decouple GitLab from NFS. And instead of writing to disk, we are going to write to Redis, then we are going to migrate logs to object store and so on. So today I wanted to show you how it actually works. So I have my GCK running here. There is a test project created called live trace demo, and I'm going to create a pipeline in here. So I need to create a new file, and it's going to be GitLab CI YAML file. And I'm going to put one job here, the one that I actually designed previously when I was testing some improvements. And there's one job. This job is going to print a number every 1 second. And we are having 300 seconds here. It means that the job should take around 5 minutes to run. During that time, we will be able to do some hacking using Rails console. But before I save this file, what is eventually going to create a pipeline, let's make sure that the new feature is disabled in my GCK. So I'm going to run feature disable CI enable live trace. Okay, so the feature is disabled. And the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to log into my Rails container console. Okay, I need to move zoom toolbar somewhere. Okay. And yeah, so let's create this pipeline. Okay, so we see that the pipeline is running, test job is running, and it should start printing numbers just in a moment. or not. But in the meantime, let's try to find. Okay, so the numbers are here, and we do have a few minutes to actually find a place where this output is actually being written in my container. So it's GCK, and in GCK by convention, all the build logs are being written to shared data, shared builds 2028 59, and we do see build log for build number 1171. Let's see if that's indeed, yeah, that's the same one. So as you can see, every 3 seconds we should see additional 3 numbers. The reason why new numbers are appearing every around 3 seconds is that is how GitLab Runner is configured. When someone is looking at the trace, when you are looking at the trace, GitLab Runner will send new output from a build on a different cadence than when it happens when no one actually is looking at the trace. By default, it's every 3 seconds for like, yeah, so you can see that we are seeing between 3 and 4 new numbers every 3 or 4 seconds. And yeah, so as you can see, what I did here is that I just invoked a Unix command that will read stream from this file. So it means that this file is on disk, and we are reading that and printing the content to standard output. And this is problematic because this file is located on disk. And whenever a runner sends a new partial trace, it contacts GitLab. It's just sending a post or put request to GitLab. And because on gitlab.com we do have multiple nodes and there is a load balancer in front of them, we never know which node the partial trace is going to be sent to, right? So we need to have shared storage that is the same storage attached to every node, and the same file needs to be present on every node for this feature to work properly. So we want to move away from shared storage, from the shared block storage, and we want to change something to avoid the need of having this file on every node. So what we have done so far is that we build this live traces feature, and I'm going to show you how it works in a moment. So let me cancel this build. Yeah, you see that it's canceled. There's no job log anymore on the disk. And we want to enable this new feature that we designed in the Rails console. Feature enable CI enable live trace, and it's now enabled everywhere. And we need to run a new pipeline again. So the new build is running. There is some output already, so we should actually see a new file on disk, right? Nope, it's not there. And it's okay because we enabled the live trace feature, which is supposed to avoid writing data to a file. But the data needs to be written somewhere, right? Because if someone visits build details page, they want to see the output, and we are writing it somewhere, but it's not being written to disk, right? So where does it actually go? So it goes to Redis. So one thing I can show you is to actually read some data from Redis, but in order to do that, I need to open some files. For example, build chunk Redis. And I just need to get the key of this particular trace that we are appending new data to. And we are going to use a shard state. Redis get, and we need to get data from a key. And the key is this, and we will need to slightly modify it in the console. So we need to put a build ID here, and it's 1172. 1172, and the chunk is 0 because it's a brand new chunk. And what the chunks are is like more complex and probably out of scope of this demo. Okay, so let's see if there is data in there. As you can see, when I invoke this command again, we are going to see additional numbers. There are going to be additional numbers, and there are going to be additional numbers. So it works. Instead of writing data to file, we are writing data to Redis. And then when the chunk is going to be full, we are going to migrate it to object store. At the end of the build, we are going to merge all the chunks again and put them into object store again so that we can, for example, access the raw complete trace directly from object store and things like that. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to show you. I will be happy to answer questions if you have them.
No, it's great, Jigorsh. Mattia, do you want to verbalize your question?
Sure. I just want to ask if we're writing structured logs to remote storage, or if we're not, how do we maintain log structure, which is basically the ability to expand and collapse certain sections of the log.
So expanding and collapsing sections is being done differently. Basically, as far as I know, it's done by frontend. So frontend receives entire trace, and then it is going to actually parse it and make it possible to collapse sections and stuff like that. This is not being done on the backend, as far as I remember. And we are writing just data to Redis without any particular structure. I might be wrong here, but I think that's how it works currently.
Cool. Steve, do you want to verbalize your question?
Sure. In the past, we've had like saturation issues where we were just putting a bunch of data in Redis and it was having production issues, right? Now, I'm guessing traces are like an important part of Gitlab, so we would be writing a lot of data. I'm curious, I'm pretty sure you folks already thought of this, but I'm curious what we might prevent, like how are we going to prevent Redis from being saturated with traces?
So that's an excellent question. And actually, we are currently working on optimizing the workflow and how the feature works. Recently, we optimized the way how we actually write data to Redis, because previously we were reading data, appending partial trace to this data in backend, doing that in memory, and then writing entire trace again to Redis, which is obviously very suboptimal. What we have done recently is that we are using a new method that will just append data without reading an entire trace and putting it back to Redis. So that's one improvement, and currently we are working on validating whether the performance improvement actually works or not. And we expect that there are probably going to be more things like that that we will need to improve. One answer that might actually shed some light on how we are invalidating chunks and removing them is that we are in Redis, we are persisting chunks that are maximum 128 kilobytes large. And once a chunk reaches 128 kilobytes, we immediately move it to object store. And then we read everything from object store, we merge chunks from different objects and present them back to user, and this is how it works. We will probably optimize it a little bit even further, but for now we are focusing on testing what we have right now. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It's quite interesting that you're putting like a limit on the chunk and then moving it. Is that like custom logic in Rails that you have to put in, or is that some feature that you enabled somewhere?
So this is a custom logic that we designed, and it's implemented on the Rails side.
Okay, nice, cool, thanks.
Cool. I dig that demo. Thanks for that, Gujagosh. It's nice to see you again. It's been a little while. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, I've generally worked with Redis in terms of it being temporal and possibly going away at any point. So what's sort of how are we handling that scenario?
So in case of Redis failure, there's this resiliency feature that we implemented that we basically, whenever a runner appends a trace, we respond to runner what amount of trace, what range of trace with offsets and data is actually persisted in a safe way. And if we actually fail to persist this data, we are going to tell to runner, look, this is what we have, and please send back from an offset that somehow got lost. So a runner will then rewind the trace and will again send the chunk that is missing. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think architecturally, I'm not super clear on what we're doing with Redis. Maybe I should be more clear, but just sort of always treated it as like, RAM sort of storage. It can go away, it can be deleted. You never really know. So that's kind of why I asked the question. Thank you for your answer.
In this case, it's a temporary store, and when a chunk reaches 128 kilobytes, we are moving it to object store or to database if object store is not configured. So Redis, we treat Redis as a volatile store, something that can actually go away and disappear. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, let's move on to Steve's demo.
Okay, so today's demo is about fixing these two issues right here. So as you know, we allow the user to specify any cache in their CI job. So we upload it and download it in the beginning and the end of the job. The cache can be anywhere. It can be on local disk or it can be in object storage. Now we support multiple object storage like S3 or like Google Cloud Storage, but we also support like Minio, for example. And Minio is like a self-hosted S3 in a way. It's like the API is compatible with S3. And now, since you can self-host the Minio, sometimes you want to have it through HTTPS, right? And since it's an internal service, you might not want to use Let's Encrypt, or you might not want to spend money on buying a certificate for self-hosted. So what most people end up doing is generating a self-signed certificate. And that means that no system trusts it unless you tell it to trust it. So this is just for cache. We also have the problem for LFS objects, because you can have Git LFS point to a different instance than the GitLab instance. It will be pointed to somewhere else. So just as a quick demo, we have a simple CI job that's creating the cache and uploading it. So I have a GitLab runner here installed, and we have the cache configured to S3, and it's going to be pointing to my own Minio instance that has a self-signed certificate. So as the classic example where an enterprise has this setup. And now I have the GitLab instance, the GitLab runner running here, and a local JDK instance. So if I retry this job, we will see it's trying to download the cache because there's cache available, and run the job, and it will also try to upload. But the problem with this is it's gonna fail in doing so, because where the cache upload command is running, it's trying to hit an HTTPS endpoint, and it's a self-signed certificate. So the system does not trust it. So we can see here a certificate signed by unknown authority. since it's an authority that I built on my own, and so on and so forth. So this becomes really problematic, and like for me to set it up properly, I'll have to, for example, build my own Docker image that trusts this certificate, and it's a lot of hassle because, like, imagine if you're using multiple containers, multiple runners, and so on and so forth. So what we have been doing is providing a simple configuration, simple magic directory, if you want, lack of a better word, where the user mounts his certificate, his CA authority. For example, this one, I have one on my local computer, and it will mount it to a specific directory, etc GitLab runner certs and ca.cert. So if I go to a branch that implements the fix and builds the runner, here we're actually building the runner, and we're building what we call the GitLab runner helper. The GitLab runner helper is where the cache upload command happens. This is a specific container that we run, that we build, just so we have control over the environment, and we can do things like the git clone, cache upload, cache artifact download as well. And the rest is on the image keyword that the user defines. So here we're building everything. It will take a few seconds. Here we're building with BuildX. This is actually a new tool that we started using for the runner team. It allows us to push multi-arc images. So we have to push to AMD 64, S390X, ARM64, and ARM. And it's all with one command, and it builds the manifests and pushes the images automatically. It's like, I'm still 50-50 split if it's nice or not, because we are having some problems with it, and there are some regressions according to it. But so far it's been helping us a lot. So the runner built, and it actually started. So now if we retry the job, we should see that we will actually upload the cache, and we will not see any issues. So uploading cache, it trusted their certificate, and like everything works correctly. We can see here updating CA certificates. It's because if we look at what we are actually doing, it is we're adding an entry point to our Docker image. And the entry point is basically looking if the file is present. If the file is present, we are running update CA certificates. If it's not, we're just continuing. So this provides a way for the user to just provide the certificate in a directory, and we will handle it automatically. The best part about this is it's going to allow us, like we had a lot of problems previously with self-signed certificates. Like we were trying to build our own certificate chain from the response. We still do that for the Git clones. But this gives us a way to tell the user, hey, you know best how the CA should be built and constructed. Just give us the CA, and we'll update the CA authority certificates. That's pretty much it. It works as well on Windows, but I did not want to show the same thing on Windows just because it's not really interesting. But yep.
That was great. Thanks, Steve. I don't see any questions. Does anyone have anything they want to ask real quick? Otherwise, we'll move over to Fabio's demo.
Okay. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so what we are going into the demo now is I'm going to show two different features, but in between I'll
ask Etienne to go over with the demo, so then I can reset my environment so to show you the next feature, because there are two different branches. So the first one will be about some improvements we are making to the way we create pipelines, pipelines validation during the creation, to also raise some warnings when we detect that some configuration might be problematic. To do that, so this feature will be available on the Lind tool directly, but also will be these warnings may be raised during the pipeline creation, either if you try to create a pipeline by the API or through the run pipeline button, and there will be possibly some warnings being raised, and we are actually going to show them on the front end as well. So far, the changes I'm going to show are backend changes, and don't judge me if I see something weird from the front end perspective, because I didn't care about like making that looking pretty. But so the goal here is that we have defined so far, just to enable this warnings feature. We have defined one scenario where we might want to alert users about some possible strange behaviors with the pipelines. And it's the case where the user doesn't specify the workflow rules in the configurations, but also has some job level rules that have the final rule, not including any of the specific context like if or changes or exist. So if you have something like a when always or when on success, or anything else, you might create multiple pipelines. So if you have a pipeline created for merge request and a pipeline created for the branch, those actually would be created like in parallel. And we've seen a lot of users kind of try to understand why they come and see this kind of weird behavior. So this is to give you just an idea about what specific warning message we're going to show. But if you try to validate this, what you see as currently this, we're gonna prettify this a little bit better, but this is gonna be one of the warnings that will be shown together with the statuses. And this says that this job may allow multiple pipelines to be created. And there is a link to a documentation where we are going to clarify exactly why this behavior it can be problematic. Again, this is not an error. The pipeline can work as expected, but we want to allow users to, we would alert users on specific behaviors. This feature could be also used eventually to as a deprecation warnings. If we want to deprecate a keyword, they want to tell the user this keyword is going to be deprecated in this version of Gitlab. So we might link the user to a specific documentation on how to migrate certain things, but just basically a different way of giving heads up to users without actually raising any exception, any errors, because they are not typically errors. And then, of course, like if you remove this behavior without creating a warning, the warning will go away. So that's all I have for this. Are there any questions? Or? Okay, I'll send over to Etienne and I'll come back later then.
Thank you, Fabio. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So I'm going to talk about deployment to ECS. This is some work that has been going on for a few months now. I'm just going to go on a quick overview of what it is about, and then I will just talk about that specific point about deploying based on a new task definition. So for a given project, we can have now a few specific variables. You can find out about that on the cloud deployment page in documentation. But these variables, if they are present in your project or in your GitLab CI file, they will allow you to deploy to Amazon ECS, to your own AWS ECS stack. So in addition to AWS credentials, you need to specify a cluster, the service that you're going to target, as well as the task definition that you're going to target. Task definition linked to the service. So this can be done by having different variables. There are some plans to just like have all those variables in a file type environment variable. So this is some near future work. And so one of the variables is the Auto DevOps platform target, which specifies the launch type that I want to target. Here it's Fargate. And then we have the task definition variable, the service, and the cluster. Here I'm making the service and the task definition environment specific. So the prerequisite for that is to have a task definition that already exists, which might not be convenient. Some people may want to create from scratch locally their own task definition. And this is what this issue was about, to have a local JSON file, create your own task definition locally, and then have a way to upload it and have it created onto your AWS ECS stack. So documentation is being reviewed at the moment. I'm just gonna give the gist of it. We will be asking users to go to that one link and to download a task definition template available on the AWS documentation. And once they do that, they can let's do a bit of demo. They can 1 second. They can specify whatever they want as their task definition. So I've prepared a task definition here, as you can see. It was like pre-populated with some data that that I related to my current AWS ECS stack. So what people can do now is just to create a folder, let's say a CI folder in their own project, and then they can put this file into that folder, let's say, and then they can push that onto their branch. Let's see, created new task definition JSON file. Push that to their own branch. And once they do that, they don't have to specify a task definition here as their variable, right? Instead, what they will be doing is to specify a CIWS ECS task definition underscore file and replace their own existing task definition name that's available on Amazon ECS by the path, which I put the JSON file in. So it was CI/TD for Fargate. Making sure that I'm in the right environment. Yeah. And then at this point, they can just trigger a new pipeline. I'm just gonna stop this one. I feel like this one may have been triggered before I defined the new environment variable. And I'm gonna run a new one. Yeah, this may take a bit of time, but as you can suspect, after the build happens here, this job review Fargate will deploy my application onto Amazon ECS, onto my my Fargate service, using the new task definition that I've defined in my project. And that's basically it. Are there any questions?
I was just wondering, so the variable needs to be type variable, not type file, and the value of the field needs to be the path to what?
So the path So there are two ways, and that will be explained more into the documentation, into the cloud deployment documentation. You can either create that CIWS ECS text definition file variable as a variable type, right? And as a value, you put the path to the JSON file you put into your project, the task definition file you put into your project. Myself, I put it into that CI folder, like project root /CI / name of the JSON file, right? So I just put as a value of that variable CI / name of that JSON file. Otherwise, what's possible is to have that same environment variable, but select the file type instead of the variable type. And as if you select file type, you can copy paste directly the content of the JSON file as a value of that environment variable, right? So just a personal choice. You may prefer to have the JSON file directly as a value of that environment variable, or as like a JSON file that sits in your project.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, I was wondering what the decision was based on that. That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's either or. Both options will be made available.
All right, thanks, Etienne. Fabio, do you want to do your next demo?
Yeah, I'll try to be as quick as I can. So I'll leave some space for Sarah and Laura. So the next feature is something that we kind of explored a little bit, and it turned out to be a useful thing. So we see often that users try to validate the YAML file using the CI link. And that turns out to be a success. So I'm going to take here, like just copy and paste the configuration. So that turns out to be success if you try to validate this YAML file. And so what they do eventually, they take this configuration, they commit, and they try to create a pipeline, and the pipeline suddenly fails. And they don't know why it is failing, or complain why the CI link is not telling me that there is something wrong with the YAML. So the problem with the CI link is that it uses a very basic type of validation, normally just syntax validation and some very basic logical validation. But it's a very small component of the entire pipeline creation logic that we currently use when we actually create a pipeline. So it's not a real simulation of what is happening. So one thing we added now is it's still currently, it's not like officially merged, but it's in progress, and it's a way of simulating a pipeline created, which internally called also dry run. And what this does, it comes in the form of enabling like a checkbox, because it's like enabling a side mode on the CI link. But what this will do is try to simulate the pipeline creation being done on master against master as a push event. And if we try to enable this mode, this actually tells us that there's something wrong with our configuration. So what it's telling us is that because we are using this rule that include this job only if we run a pipeline for merge request, by default, if we run a pipeline of branch, this job will not be included in the pipeline. And then we are left with having a test job that needs a build job, which actually doesn't exist. And this was not caught by the existing CI link. So with this feature, it gives more, it's a lot more powerful because it actually simulates the entire pipeline creation. It returns a pipeline object back. And we could do a lot of interesting things with this. Like we could eventually possibly display the pipeline chart, for example, within the CI link page, so actually telling you what the actual pipeline would look like. You could, and eventually, the most important thing is like we are making the CI link using a single source of truth, which is like the actual pipeline creation. Well, this comes with some limitations. As you can see at the moment, we can only create a pipeline against the default branch, but this limitation can be overcome very easily. This is because it's just the first iteration, but eventually we can allow people to specify other types of context parameters, like I want this merge request to be associated with this branch. I want this pipeline to run against this specific branch, or to run against a tag, or I want to simulate a scheduled pipeline running, not a push pipeline. So you can have all these various contexts you can define, and we actually will run a simulation and you get like accurate results, which we currently, with having the CI linked without this simulation, it's simply telling us that syntactically looks correct, but semantically it doesn't run that kind of validation. So yeah, that's all I have. It's a question from Steve. Well, the future, yeah, if the user could add their own variables. Yeah, so what we are looking for ideas on what kind of context the user might want to build for. So yeah, variables could be one of them, as well as some source, pipeline source. So for example, if you want to simulate a merge request or schedule pipeline, or specific branch. There could be a lot of things we could actually add, like even the commit message, because we have some validations like a CI skip on commit message. So you might want to have specific things and actually see whether the pipeline is created correctly or not. Fred, do you want to verbalize your question?
Yeah, sure. I'm a great job, by the way. This is pretty cool. I was thinking that down the road, what could be interesting is having a way for the user to see the distinction between what is YAML specific errors and what is more like logic or configuration error. Because right now it's just the table, or if it doesn't work, it's just like, well, you have a pipeline, like a configuration error, but your YAML might be valid. And so presenting this as a distinction might be super useful. Like your YAML is valid, but here's the configuration that you're going to have when you're problem that you're going to have when you run this actual pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point, because in reality, certain types of validation really depend on the context the pipeline runs against, which just the CI lint currently doesn't have that context. Yeah, that's a good point. Cool. If we have some time, I'll pass over to Sarah and Laura then.
I'll jump in real quick. Just want to say we'll keep going to include Sarah and Laura's demo. I posted a link here to the issue. If you have feedback on this meeting, this format, please include it there. And if you have to go to another meeting, that's fine. We'll post this on Unfiltered too, so you can catch up on the recording. Over to Sarah and Laura.
Thanks, Darby. So we are, like I said, we're running over a little bit. So what I'm going to do is do a top level version of what we've been working on with GraphQL. And then Laura and I are actually going to make a little bit longer video where I can ask her lots of questions about the back end and put that on Unfiltered. But I'm really excited to share this with everyone. So a little bit of background. On CI, we are working towards using more GraphQL. We're really lucky that Laura joined us recently. She did front-end work before on the Monitor team, so she is a mistress of the entire stack, which has been really helpful because GraphQL is really a lot about making it a bit easier for front-end and back-end to work together. In terms of backend, once a way to get the data into GraphQL is made possible, then you don't need to make us new endpoints all the time, right? Front end isn't always like, I need this endpoint, I need this endpoint. We can access it directly. And likewise, it means that instead of sequencing front end and back end, with back end always first, the front end can work ahead and make sort of client resolvers that then can sort of show what kind of data the front end is expecting. And so overall, the goal is to make it easier to work together, and there's a performance boost. So Apollo, which is the layer we use with our GraphQL, has some built-in caching and some deduplication of queries, so that if a bunch of different pieces are asking for the same query, it can be smart enough to sort of group those. So that's sort of like why we're using GraphQL. And so what we decided to do is move the DAG. If you guys were at this call before, you might remember the big 2B graph that looks like it came from the 1970s. We decided to work on porting that to GraphQL first because since it's new and relatively simple, there wasn't a bunch of extra technical debt or like really complex things going on with it in terms of the interface between backend and front end. And since it's a data viz, we have like a very clear idea of the structure of the data that we want. So when you're working with GraphQL, one really nice thing is this GraphQL Explorer, graphical, but you can find it on your GDK at GraphQL-Explorer. And it lets you basically create queries and mutations and then run them against the data that you have to make sure that you're doing it right. And it will autocomplete things for you and do all sorts of fun stuff. It will tell you, that this is the name, it's a string for the title of the CI stage, etc. And so what Laura has done is she wrote the resolvers, so the backend parts that tell GraphQL how to give me this cool data that I want for our pipelines. So I have this project and I have to tell it which project we want. And this is basically how you pass variables to a GraphQL query and the pipeline ID. And then I can get all of this really cool data that I need for the front end. And the way that sort of works on the front end is, well, there's sort of two notes. So you change your structure a little bit. Now inside our pipeline structure, we have a cool new folder called GraphQL, has queries. And this is where that query I just showed you before lives. My computer wants to be desperately slow, so we'll see if it shows you what it looks like at any point. Yeah, there you go. There's that cool query. And then we are able to break out our details to, this is how we get the app, how we bootstrap the app up. So this is the element that's creating a new DAG. And now we just use our